What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. While sniping might not necessarily be considered meta in the First Descendant at the moment, at least not in the circles that I play that are dominated by guns like the Enduring Legacy, and so it is still a super satisfying way to play the game, and the game actually offers us two choices in ultimate snipers to use. Now, I ended up opting to grow the Afterglow sword first, and this was the one that I concentrated on maxing out first and creating a build behind it that would allow me to do some really funky things. Now, of course, just having this as a weapon that carries you through a void intercept fight is not always possible and not always the best choice. It's certainly applicable in certain cases, definitely looking at Devourer getting his cheeks clapped again. But what I really do like about this setup and about a sniper like this is that it's a fantastic support weapon that allows you to pull off snipes on critical points on specific void intercept bosses, which can oftentimes get you out of a tight situation. The other thing that I really enjoy using this weapon for is outpost clearing. Oftentimes some of these bosses feel tougher for me than actually fighting the Devourer, and it's absolutely satisfying just one-tapping these bosses as soon as they appear, as soon as you finish a hacking attempt with Sharon. In fact, this has come to be the thing that I actually use this weapon the most for, is when I'm out in the world and I'm fighting bosses or something like that, and it's just a yellow bar or something like that. You can just delete them instantly with one bullet, and it is super satisfying. So just starting us off with the base stats of the weapon, and maybe I can just move my face over here for now. Basically what you want to be rolling on here is you want to be getting crit rate and you want to be creating crit hit damage. Those two are super important to get. The Afterglow sword has decent stats with regards to those two stats already, but what you are trying to do is you're trying to get as close to 100% as possible so that the majority of your shots when you shoot them crit and thereby deliver an insane amount of damage to the enemy area, whether you're shooting them in a weak spot or not. Then we also want to be getting firearm attack on, because of course we want to be getting that additional percentage of just raw DPS on top of the gun. And then I would say your fourth is basically dealer's choice. I don't think that having bonus firearm attack versus Colossus is that big a deal due to the fact that you're shooting one bullet at a time. And I think that this is definitely a stat that matters more if you basically shooting with a machine gun and it's applying this additional damage to every bullet. That being said, it is a useful fourth one to have, although I think you could also get away with using something like weak damage, which I think would also be pretty damn good. Of course, you could also have an element on here. However, I think that's the last one that you should be aiming for. Obviously, I mean, let's not go for things like recoil and additional clip and all of that stuff. But if you want to use elements on this weapon, it's far better to just apply that with a module. Now, before we start looking at the actual modules on the weapon, let's quickly discuss exactly how the Afterglow sword's unique ability works, which is called Nightmare Reaper. Now, as you can see, it says that when you hit a weak point, it inflicts a unique effect called Death Propagation on hitting an enemy commander or Colossus, which is one of the things that I really like about this gun. It has different effects that come from this unique depending on what you're fighting. It increases firearm critical hit rate and applies the effect to the attack. So you can see here that I have 4 out of 4, and that will increase these stats over time. So the base version of this gun has these, but obviously the stats will be far worse than what you're actually seeing in front of you right now. So it has a fire rate of -10% and an effective range drop-off start at 20%. Now these stats are much worse if you only have a base version of the gun, and that's why it might not feel as sexy until you start kitting it out. Now, Death Propagation, the effect itself has a duration of 5 seconds, and it has 6 stacks that it can stack, which is a good thing because generally speaking, without messing with the size of the magazine in a sniper rifle or anything like that, you have 6 bullets that you can shoot before you have to reload. The reload time modifier is 2%, the weak point damage is 9%, reload time modifier per stack is 3%, weak point damage per stack is 3%. So every time you hit with a bullet, these will compound and stack on one another, making your weak point shots hit that much harder. Then it says that when you're hitting an enemy commander, aka like those dudes that I was talking about that are like the bosses of an outpost, you will get a critical hit rate increase of 22.5%, and also when you're hitting a Colossus, you will get the same thing. So as you can see, the idea of this weapon here is to hit weak points. Hitting those weak points is going to increase your stats, and you're also going to get a massive boost to your critical hit rate. Now, when we look at the actual mods for the weapon itself, of course, there are, I would say, probably 3 to 4 different ways that you can build this. And I tried to kind of like set it up in that way, of course, you know, barring the fact that we can't, you know, change the polarity of these, and I had to work within the confines of choosing once per cell. That being said, I left one swing slot that we could mess around with and we could put other things into. So you'll notice that essentially most of my mods on all three of these are exactly the same, with a few changes which I'll explain. So first of all, just when we look at it here, One Hit Wonder is essentially focusing on strengthen first shot as the star of it. And the idea of this is that your first pull after reloading the gun hits super hard, and then you have a 10-second cooldown before you can again reload and again get a really big 200% firearm attack increase to your bullets. Now you'll notice that having strengthened first shot on the weapon here is what gives it this massive boost to its DPS. So it's basically kind of like assuming already that you have that bonus, you know, in place. So you can see it drops down to 547, and then obviously when I put it back on again, then bloop, jumps back up to 1.1 million. The other thing is this cell over here is also free for you to put anything into. Bullet rain is just something that I put in there to just give me some more paper DPS. I don't think that fire rate is at all a stat that makes any sense on a sniper rifle, but I also just get that 1% of firearm attack in the back there, so just for some extra EPness points. But the bottom line is this is the slot that I use when I want to change the element type. So for example, if I feel like I want to give myself a little bit of additional juice, then what I can do is I can take bullet rain out and I can put in like additional, you know, toxic damage or something like that. So I can go ahead and put toxic enhancement in there and then boost it up with how many points I have left for that. And then that gives me additional damage to enemies that are also weak to toxic. Now, the other choices should come as no surprise. These are, I would consider, the standard picks for pretty much every single gun that tries to crit and tries to crit hard and also tries to hit weak points while they crit. So the same old culprits here as usual: rifling reinforcement, action and reaction, and let me see, well, usually it would be those two, and then it would be fire rate. So in this case, of course, we don't include fire rate, but these two are just raw damage increases. You do have this recoil addition on action and reaction, but doesn't really matter on a sniper rifle because you're shooting one bullet at a time, so you should be able to control that. And then I use better insight and better concentration, which both of those, basically one giving me a massive increase to critical hit rate and the other one giving me a massive increase to the damage when I do crit. Then I use focus fire to give me some additional weak point damage as well as some more critical hit damage. I use edging shot to give me a massive amount of critical hit rate and actually also giving me a firearm attack penalty. Now this penalty is 15%, but the point is the addition that you get from being able to crit more often, when we look at the full stats of the weapon now, will make sense because the Afterglow sword has a huge crit multiplier. So it's far better for you to be critting more than it is for you to have a higher DPS value. Just one is more optimal than the other. Then we're using straightforward blue weak point sight because we're getting that flat 35 increase to weak point damage. And then last but not least, we're using concentration priority, which again gives us a big boost to our critical hit damage and then also affects our reload modifier. Now, the other option that you have if you don't want to use strengthen first shot is you can also use something like weak point expansion. You'll notice all the other mods are exactly the same. The only difference is I swapped in weak point expansion here. Now, weak point expansion says that on weak point hit, weak point damage gets plus by 140%. This also has a cooldown of 10 seconds. Now basically what you're talking about, the difference between the two here, and what I'll do is as I'm explaining this, I will have some footage running in the background, one of me doing a devourer kill with strengthen first shot, and then one of me doing a devourer kill with weak point expansion. Personally, for me, it comes down to the fact of whether I am playing solo or in a group. I feel that if you are playing in a group, I think that strengthen first shot works phenomenally well because you will not always have the enemy's attention, and so you can truly embrace this sniper lifestyle where you can shoot all of your bullets out, and then when you see a brick lying around somewhere, you can run over to it, you can reload your gun, and you can benefit from that massive, increase of firearm attack on your first bullet after reloading. In the case of you playing solo, the situation is the exact opposite. So now the boss is solely focused on you, as is his ads, and the pressure's a lot more on you to essentially stay out of trouble while also pulling off these shots. In that case, I feel that it's far more important to not put all your eggs into one basket with this big shot after a reload and then kind of like suffering for, you know, damage a little bit after that, or maybe not having enough bullets left in your magazine or in your reserves to reload to get the benefit. And I think in this case, weak point expansion is much better, because you can shoot and you can reposition and you can shoot and you can reposition, and as long as you leave enough time in between there to cool down, you're going to get that benefit almost every single time, unless you are firing a couple of these bullets in a row. So that's really the only difference for me between the two. That's the choice that goes in my head. If I am running solo, then I'm gonna go ahead and use weak point expansion. And if I'm messing around in a group, or something that I actually also like doing with this gun, is actually going back and just doing some of the normal bosses, because usually you have people there that are struggling with these bosses, and it is super satisfying basically one tapping or two shooting one of these bosses, and it generally helps out the people and everything like that. Plus it makes you look cool, so it's a win-win kind of situation. One other thing that I've also been experimenting with has been dopaminergic activate. This is actually a mod that I've started to use on some of my other guns to just experiment with just how effective it can be, and I was actually pleasantly surprised with this. So let me show you something quickly. When we look at the strengthened first shot and we look at the weapon stats, you can see that we are sitting at 84.5% critical hit rate and a 3.5 times multiplier for our crit damage. And then we're sitting at a very respectable almost 3 times multiplier for weak point. If we go, however, to the weak point expansion, you'll see that this the two stats at the top, the crit and the crit hit damage, stay the same, but now we have a far more substantial, you know, hitting power when it comes to weak point damage, sitting at an over 5 times multiplier, which is very sexy. Now, what dopamine or dopaminergic activate does is it actually maxes out our critical hit rate, and it gives us just a huge amount of multiplier there as well. As you can see, it actually increases quite significantly, whereas our weak point stays the same. This means we're going to be critting a lot more, and I feel like this dopaminergic activate is super useful for potentially when you are not doing void intercept bosses and you just want to be pulling off a crit shot every time. Maybe you're fighting a bunch of yellow bar enemies or something like that. And generally speaking, this, for example, is the build that I run when I am playing outposts and stuff like that. So other than that, you'll see that the mods are exactly everything the same. And yeah, this is kind of like a very fun weapon to use, and something that I've been enjoying a lot. Like I said, I think at the moment right now, it's not possible that you can build an entire meta around it, because it's simply not effective against some of the really tough enemies. But I think it fits very well into what it is supposed to be, which is a support weapon. I really like the fact that you can basically whip it out and shoot, you know, bits off of enemies from super far away, or tag an enemy that's bothering one of your allies or something like that. I'm definitely excited to see what other sniper rifles we might potentially be getting in the future. Next up, I'll definitely be trying out piercing light. So if you enjoyed this, stay tuned. That's coming up soon. And that's it for the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Let me know if you have leveled up one of the snipers, either the Afterglow sword or piercing light. Do you prefer piercing light to the Afterglow? Is this something that you still want to do? I think that this weapon pairs well with Sharon, for example, who is a Descendant that I didn't really like a lot at the beginning and didn't really waste a lot of time with, but actually have been playing a lot recently, and I'll actually be bringing a video out on that pretty soon. But I do think that Sharon is super undervalued and pretty damn cool, and I'm very excited for when she eventually gets her ultimate and what could potentially come from that. But other than that, it's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Till next video, fucking cheers.